For today's video, I got my hands on the cheapest NZXT build pre-built. It's part of the restructuring of their new starter lineup, and it's a $700 system with some interesting design decisions that we'll get into in a little bit. But before all of that, for the sake of full disclosure, NZXT did actually send me the system. I didn't pay for it with my own money, although there were no strings attached. So if there's something wrong with it, like it gives me, I don't know, stage 3 hemorrhoids, I'm gonna tell you about it. Okay, so let's see how the system's packaged. That's always exciting. Oh, that's foam. That's really thick foam. Look at that. That's awesome. And then, because of all that protective foam, we have a very good condition normal case box. Ooh, already seeing what looks like good things through the back here. And then here is the quick start. And then here is the quick start guide that you get with the system, just basically how to plug everything in. Ooh, I'm so sorry, PC. Well, I guess after that, we're gonna find out how well that internal packing material actually works. Okay, let's open it up and see how much damage I actually did to it. Ooh, there we go. It's actually got all of the accessories in the case, just like that. I guess with the packing foam, that's okay. So with that, let's look at the system. Now, first things first, and this is definitely, we're gonna have to get our Gary hats out here because the front USB 3 is not plugged in. That's really not ideal. Although, upon closer inspection, you can see that the top 2 pins of the connector are actually damaged, and I did Hulk smash the PC out of its box. So honestly, it's probably my fault. Maybe when I dropped it, the packaging inside the PC shifted and just like ripped the connector out. Other than that, the cable management looks really good. Although you do have that M-ATX motherboard in a full ATX case look, which kind of reminds me of like a really tiny dude driving a Ford F350. Now, let's have a look at the specs of this system, which is a bit of a mixed bag. First off, we've got the H510, which is a case that I really like. I actually use it for my editing rig and it's held up really well. When looking at the inside of the system, the first thing that I notice is the single 8 gig stick of RAM, and that really seems to be a theme with these pre-built systems. Why don't they just use 2 4 gig sticks? Having dual channels so much better. Although this is an Intel system, so hopefully it's not going to affect the performance as badly as it did on that Alienware system I did a video on recently. When it comes to the speed of this RAM, it's going to be running at up to 3000 megahertz. Now, in reality, what that means is you're going to be getting 2400 megahertz out of the box, and you can enable XMP profiles to get it up to 3000 megahertz. Now, personally, I don't really understand why NZXT has an issue with running the RAM at above 2400 megahertz out of the box, because all of the pre-builts from like big OEM manufacturers like Dell and Acer that I've looked at had their RAM running at its rated speed straight out of the box, like 2660 megahertz or whatever. The only thing that I can think of is maybe XMP and NZXT used to date, and then XMP profiles dumped NZXT for like Dell or HP or whatever, and now all they can do is make awkward eye contact at parties. But anyway, moving on to the rest of the system. As far as the CPU goes, we've got an Intel i3 9100F, which is a 4-core, 4-thread CPU. It's not the greatest, but at least they put a really good cooler on it, so the temperatures are gonna be cool and it's gonna be nice and quiet. And then as far as the graphics card goes, we've got an MSI Ventus GTX 1650 in here. We'll have a look at the performance of the system a bit later and then discuss this component selection. There are, however, a couple of really good things about the specs of this pre-built. The first one is the motherboard, which is an MSI B365M mortar, which for a pre-built system at this price point is an amazing motherboard. Usually pre-builts give you the motherboard equivalent of like a medium-sized head injury, so that's great. The other pretty big deal for this system is the fact that its boot drive is a 500 gig NVMe SSD. That's amazing! Even the $1,100 Alienware pre-built only had a normal hard drive in it. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. As far as the power supply goes, we've got an EVGA BR450 in it, which is an 80 plus bronze rated power supply. It's fairly entry level, but honestly, in a pre-built, if the power supply isn't gonna give you diphtheria, it's a really good thing. As far as rear I/O goes, we've actually got two PS2 ports, which is pretty cute. And then we've got two USB 2, 3 USB 3, a 3.1 type C. We've got HDMI here as well. And then an Ethernet port with some audio connectors. And then the graphics card gives us a DVI, a DisplayPort, and HDMI. And then we've also got some added Wi-Fi, which is always a nice addition. Okay, so with that, let's put the side panel back on and see if it still turns on after Dawid had a little whoopsie. Okay, here's the moment of truth. I've got it all plugged in. Let's see if I broke it and need to send a very apologetic message to NZXT. I mean, it's powering on. Let's see if we get a display output. Yes, it's fine. I wasn't worried at all. I definitely wasn't planning on running away. When it comes to the Windows, it's not been set up, which is really nice. I mean, you can do your own Windows setup. Now, there are actually two pieces of software other than Windows that come pre-installed on the system, so that's a pretty big win when it comes to pre-built bloatware. The first one is NZXT Cam, which I guess makes sense because it's an NZXT system. And then the second one is GeForce Experience, which will set up your graphics card drivers for you, so that's pretty nice. Although, I wish they got rid of the damn email login requirement for GeForce Experience. I really hate this. So hopefully one day NVIDIA will take this and shove it far up a hole of theirs. So let's see what kind of gaming performance we get from this system. As far as the gaming performance goes, it's pretty much exactly in line with what you'd expect from a GTX 1650. Most of the games are very playable at 1080p with a combination of medium to high settings. Here you can see Battlefield 5 running. This is at high settings, and yeah, it's very playable. In fact, it's a lot more playable than it was on that $1,100 Alienware system, just because of how that hardware configuration crippled that PC. The 1% lows on that system got down to 12 frames per second, whereas on the GTX 1650 based build system, we were getting a 1% low of 25 frames per second. So that is a much more playable result. Although, if I was playing multiplayer, I'd probably drop it down to medium settings for a higher frame rate. When it comes to Fortnite, at 1080p competitive settings, which is what I tested at now, considering that every time I tested Fortnite using epic settings, I'd get some sweaty 14-year-old telling me that like, what kind of boomer plays Fortnite at epic settings? But yeah, so at competitive settings, you can get high refresh rate 1080p gaming performance out of this system. So yeah, if you're looking to play Fortnite, this will do that very well. Now, when it comes to all of those performance benchmarks, I did run this system in its out-of-the-box configuration, so that means the RAM was running at 2400 MHz as opposed to 3000 MHz. Now, as I said earlier in the video, I find the whole NZXT XMP breakup situation really weird. But when it comes to the RAM configuration, what I actually find more irritating is the fact that they have a single 8 gig stick of RAM in there. I really feel like a broken record on these pre-built videos. Like, I'm always complaining about this, but just stop doing that. If you have to have 8 gigs of RAM in a system, use 2 4 gig sticks. Dual channel's just better. Which brings me neatly to the discussion around the component selection in this build. Because initially, on paper, I was like, ooh, that's not ideal. We've got a previous Gen i3 mixed with the GTX 1650, both of which are reasonably questionable components. But I think there are a couple of reasons NZXT went with this configuration.
The first one is they sacrificed a bit on gaming performance to be able to get just better base components, like a decent motherboard and a decent power supply, which is great. It means that every time you turn the system on, you don't have to be worried about accidentally taking down Kazakhstan's power grid or whatever, right? So it's going to be more reliable. They've got decent cooling on the components as well, which that's great as well. It's a quiet system and everything sits at like mid 50s while gaming, which is really good. And then there's the fact that they included an SSD of a reasonable size at this price point. That's a huge deal, and even that $1,100 Alienware system didn't have that in, and it makes just the day-to-day desktop usability of this system so much better. Using that Alienware system on the desktop is a little bit like pushing bamboo under your fingernails, whereas this one I'd happily live with as a daily driver just because of the SSD. That little thing makes such a big difference. Now, you may be thinking, I get it, they sacrificed gaming performance to get a better base system, but they could have chosen better value for money parts in the price categories of the components that they chose. Instead of an i3, get like a 3100 Ryzen CPU, and instead of a GTX 1650, get an RX 570. Now, I asked the NZXT rep that exact question, and his response actually made quite a bit of sense. Availability is a big issue, as we all know. The 3100 is a better price to performance component than the 9100, and the motherboards and stuff are cheaper as well, but that CPU is like a fickle unicorn beast that's only intermittently in stock anywhere, whereas the 9100F is everywhere. The same thing goes for the GTX 1650. The availability of that part is so good, I'm convinced there's like a geyser that just naturally produces them somewhere. Unfortunately for a pre-built manufacturer, availability outweighs price to performance, and that's why we've got this system spec here. And I actually do agree with the compromise that they struck, because the gaming performance on this system for games that people actually play, like esports titles and Minecraft and Roblox and all of that stuff, it's perfectly adequate at 1080p, and then you still get a good base system with future upgradability options that isn't a potential fire hazard. Just bear in mind, other pre-built manufacturers that follow this good base system approach to speccing out their pre-builts, at this price point, you're still stuck with integrated Vega graphics as opposed to only a GTX 1650. So with that, let me know in the comment section below what you think of this entry-level NZXT build system. I think for $700 it strikes an interesting compromise for a pre-built system, because yeah, some $700 pre-builds can be pretty janky. So anyway, if you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Do consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps me buy more random stuff to do videos on, and that's massively appreciated. And until the next video, bye-bye.